In this video, I'll discuss another of the most mind-bogglingly complicated compositions by Bach, the opening chorus of his BWV 14 cantata, one of the latest of his surviving church cantatas, composed in 1735, based on this chorale text by Martin Luther himself. Like numerous other Bach cantatas, this one starts with a chorale fantasy, a contrapuntally complex chorus based on a chorale melody, usually setting the first verse of the chorale text, and ends with a much simpler, easy-to-sing setting of the final verse, presumably so the church congregation could sing along. In any of Bach's chorale fantasies, if we're talking about his cantatas, or chorale preludes if we're talking about his organ works, it helps to become acquainted with the simple melody before trying to comprehend what he does with it. So let's first listen to the final movement of this cantata, the simple harmonized chorale. Notice that it has 7 phrases, but since the first 2 repeat, I'll number them 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5. Now let's return to the opening chorus to see and hear the unbelievable complexity that Bach derives from this simple chorale melody. His standard template for this kind of chorus is to begin with a fugal or imitative treatment of an often decorated version of the chorale phrase, followed by a slower, so rhythmically augmented, cantus firmus version of that phrase. The cantus firmus is usually a simpler, unembellished version of the tune, so it's more prominent and easier for the average listener to recognize when it enters. This chorus generally follows that plan, but with some additional spectacular feats of counterpoint. It has 7 sections, one for each of the 7 chorale phrases, and the first section begins with the tenors singing a slightly decorated version of the first chorale phrase, but now in triple meter. First, listen again to the original phrase. And now listen to the decorated version.
Wär Gott, nicht, diese.
As you may have already noticed, only 1 bar later, so mostly overlapping temporally, the basses enter with the exact inversion of this same decorated phrase. Remember the somewhat similar inversion fugue from my video about the BWV 179 Cantata Chorus, in which the subject and then the counter-subject are answered by their inversions. As complicated as that chorus was, the close inverted imitation of this chorus is far more difficult to achieve because significantly overlapping a subject with its own inversion is much trickier than simply following it by its inversion. To simplify things in this video, I'll highlight the original upright phrases red and the inverted or upside down phrases green. So notice that the red initially ascends and the green initially descends, and so forth. The altos now enter with the same phrase transposed up a fifth, answered again 1 bar later by its inversion sung by the sopranos. For the most part, the strings just double the singers, so I won't highlight them. But notice that in this chorus, the cantus firmus is not sung, but instead is played by the hunting horn and the oboes. I'll give it this blue color. As you hear this first cantus firmus entry, you might not initially notice the mind-boggling 5 overlapping entries of the original decorated phrase and its inversion that accompany it. And in addition to these 5 complete entries, we also have these 2 smaller fragments at the beginning. Notice also that the inverted imitation of the initial fugue actually extends farther than just the chorale phrases, and that additional inversion symmetry can be found all over the score, though I'll only highlight the actual chorale phrases and their fragments. The second section now begins with the slightly altered second phrase, so first listen to the original. And now the altered version. You've likely already noticed that this second phrase is also combined with its inversion. As I mentioned before, with this kind of contrapuntal wizardry, the more the entries overlap, the more difficult they are to combine with each other. So you might think that Bach is now slacking off by bringing in the second entry 2 bars later instead of just 1. But he makes up for this by having the next 2 enter earlier, so the second and third entries overlap. The cantus firmus of the second phrase now enters, again amazingly combined with 5 additional upright and inverted entries. The third section is based on the identical first phrase, but it's far from an exact repeat of the first section, since it begins with even more difficult to compose 3-part close imitation, each entering at the distance of a single bar, followed by even more overlapping entries, including shorter fragments. When the cantus firmus enters, notice that on this downbeat, for the first time, we have 5 different entries of the chorale occurring simultaneously. And if we add these additional entries, the blue cantus firmus overlaps this time with a total of 10 other entries. Bach often uses this kind of complexity as part of his religious symbolism, as I've pointed out in many prior Bach cantata videos. But in this chorus, it really seems like he's just intellectually amusing himself with a more abstract, systematic demonstration of his contrapuntal skill, similar to what he did in later pieces like the Musical Offering and the Art of Fugue. The fourth section, based again on chorale phrase number 2, is also not an exact repeat of the second section, but is much more similar in terms of entries, though the phrases themselves now have this extra repeated note to fit the new line of text. Before going on, I should mention that this chorus is often compared to the very first Bach Cantata Chorus I discussed on this channel, the opening chorus from BWV 80, since both are unbelievably complex, and both have an instrumental cantus firmus. However, the overall plan of this chorus reminds me much more of his so-called deathbed chorale prelude for organ, BWV 668, that, as you can see, treats the chorale phrases in a very similar manner. I would normally play an excerpt at this point, but I'm actually analyzing this entire piece in my next video, so stay tuned. Back to BWV 14, the fifth section is based on the third chorale phrase, so remember what the original sounded like. And now listen to the altered version that prolongs two of the notes and adds these extra descending 16th notes. As you just heard, the inversion of this decorated third phrase enters a single bar later, and notice that this 16th note fragment is also present in the bass line that I'm not highlighting, which also frequently participates in the inversion symmetry. Also, notice that this fragment has already been anticipated on the prior page, and that it's been present all along in the portions I haven't been highlighting. After the initial 4 entries, the phrase cycles through the 4 voices again in a half-simplified form that retains the long notes but omits the extra descending 16th notes. After these 4 entries, the cantus firmus appears, accompanied by a completely simplified version, just the original chorale phrase but in triple meter, and its inversion, followed by more entries of the half-simplified form. The 6th section is based on a very decorated 4th chorale phrase, so the original sounded like this. And here's the very decorated version. As expected, this phrase also appears in 4-part imitation with its exact inversion, followed by the cantus firmus entry, combined this time with merely 4 barely overlapping entries. We've already seen in the prior sections Bach flaunting his supernatural ability to combine and overlap far more simultaneous entries of the phrases, but in these 2 final sections, he instead challenges himself with the separate technical difficulty of inverting much more complex decorative flourishes like these. The final 7th section is based on another complex decoration of this time phrase 5. Here's what the original sounded like. And here's the complicated version. This, of course, also enters in close imitation with its inversion 1 bar later, and then in the other 2 voices. But notice that we again have the inversion canon extending beyond the chorale phrases for all 4 entries. 4 additional entries that this time overlap even more lead to the final cantus firmus entry that is unaccompanied by other chorale phrases until its final prolonged note, during which this simplified version of the 5th phrase cycles through all 4 voices and the oboes, then cycles through again as even shorter fragments before the chorus ends with 3 imitative entries of this fragment from phrase 3. Now listen to this entire mind-bogglingly complex chorus without interruption.